The old Dutch church stood on a knoll. Twisted branches clawed at its weathered stone. Shadows stretched long and gnarled from the ancient oaks. The air grew damp and heavy as dusk settled over Sleepy Hollow. A low mist rose from the ground. It clung to the dead leaves, whispering of forgotten horrors. Night fell, the moon hid behind a veil of clouds. This only intensified the darkness. The only sound was the rustle of leaves and the distant cry of an owl. It was a night for stories, stories whispered around campfires, stories that made you afraid to turn out the light, stories of the Headless Horseman. Jacob loved a good scare. Tonight he was in for the ultimate fright. He and his friends, Emily, Ben and Chloe, were spending Halloween in Sleepy Hollow. They were drawn to the legend, eager to tempt fate in the heart of darkness. Jacob, with a cocky grin, tossed another log on the crackling fire. "Ready for the Headless Horseman, guys?" Emily shivered, pulling her jacket tighter. "Don't jinx us, Jake." "Scared, Em?" Ben teased, nudging her with his elbow. "No," she retorted, though her voice wavered. "Just respecting the legend." But deep down, a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. This was no campfire story. Sleepy Hollow felt different, ancient and hungry. Armed with flashlights, they plunged into the woods. The path was treacherous. Roots snaked across the ground, waiting to trip them. The darkness pressed in, suffocating. The air grew colder, biting at their exposed skin. Each gust of wind sounded like a whispered threat. Jacob, ever the daredevil, led the way. He relished the fear that prickled at the back of his neck. They reached the bridge from the legend. It arched over a stream choked with fallen leaves. The water gurgled and churned, a sinister melody in the night. Chloe stopped, her breath catching in her throat. "Guys, maybe we should go back." Jacob laughed, his voice echoing in the stillness. "Scared of a ghost story, Chloe?" He stepped onto the bridge. A blood-curdling shriek tore through the night. It came from behind them, back on the path. They spun around, hearts pounding. A figure emerged from the trees. It was tall and imposing, silhouetted against the moon which had broken free from the clouds. It sat astride a massive black horse. Its eyes glowed with an infernal light. Then they saw it. Or rather, what it wasn't. No head. Just a ragged stump where a head should be. In its hand, a wickedly curved sword gleamed in the moonlight. The Headless Horseman. He was real. Panic seized them. They scrambled back, screaming. But there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The horseman urged his steed forward. Its hooves pounded the earth like the drums of war. The horseman reached them. He swung his sword with terrifying force. Ben, frozen in terror, didn't even have time to scream. His head flew from his body, landing with a sickening thud in the dirt. Blood sprayed, hot and metallic. Emily and Chloe, their screams lost in the night, turned and ran. But the horseman was upon them. He grabbed Emily by her hair, yanking her back with inhuman strength. Her scream was cut short as the sword found its mark. Jacob, momentarily paralyzed by fear, snapped out of his stupor. He watched in horror as Chloe, tripping over roots and branches, desperately tried to escape. He saw the horseman dismount, his heavy boots thudding on the soft earth. He saw the glint of the sword raised high in the moonlight. He heard Chloe's screams abruptly silenced. He was alone. Jacob, his legs finally responding, ran. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs screamed for mercy. He didn't look back, didn't dare to. The image of the horseman, the blood, the screams were seared into his mind. He burst from the trees, stumbling into the clearing where they had made camp. The fire had died down, leaving only glowing embers and a thin wisp of smoke. He collapsed on the ground, gasping for air, his body racked with sobs. As the first rays of dawn pierced the darkness, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple, he knew one thing for sure. The legend of Sleepy Hollow was real, and he was the only one left to tell it, if he ever dared to speak of it again. The horseman had vanished. Back to the shadows he waited. He waited for the next group of thrill-seekers drawn to the legend. He would be waiting.